Welcome back once more to another episode of For All the Saints podcast. It's so good to have you here. My conversation today, which I hope you'll find faith refreshing, is with the fantastic Tammy Peterson. She is a podcaster herself, and she's also the wife of Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson, who you may know. They've been on tour together with his new book. And I wanted to speak to Tammy about her conversion to Catholicism and the incredible story of how she found God, or God found her, through an experience where she was very close to death. So it's an incredible, inspiring story, and I hope you enjoy it. And also, if you can, drop a like, subscribe to the channel for more faith promoting content, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the For All the Saints podcast, and I'm here with Tammy Peterson. Tammy, thank you so much for coming on, and it's been a very busy Easter for you, hasn't it?
Yes, it has, but it's a pleasure to sit down with you. Yes, I've been traveling and I was home and got confirmed into the church. And yes, that was very busy, but it was beautifully done. It was beautifully
Right.
done. Everyone took great care, I thought. Both Jordan and I are very pleased at how it went.
Is there a reason you were confirmed on Easter Sunday? Is that just a traditional thing that happens, or was that something that was important to you?
No, I think it's a traditional thing that happens because there were a number of us being there were three or four men who were being baptized and maybe six of us being confirmed. So that's what they that's what it that's what they habitually do, I guess. Or that's my understanding.
Right. And could you take us through the process of what actually happens? I know that Catholicism is a beautiful faith tradition, and I love learning about it. But I'd love to know what actually happens when you join. And you had said on an interview that you felt like you were home. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
and yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I'll start when I was a child and we went to the Protestant church. And I used to go to Sunday school like every little child. But something in the Protestant church was missing as far as I was concerned because I didn't know where Mother Mary was because she doesn't play prominently in the sermons, the Sunday sermons. And that was a question right from the time I was young. For whatever reason, I can't explain why, but I definitely was looking for her. And as I got older and my mother got older and my daughter was ill and my mother died, I prayed to my mother to intercede and to help with Michaela's illness. And I asked the priest when I was in the catechism, I said, "So I've been praying to my mother for quite a while." And he said that he didn't think that that was unusual. And I said, if I think about it, I was probably praying to what was best in mothers, which would be Mother Mary. And so, some way or another, I was praying to Mother Mary. And I found that attractive. I found that to be uh, a nurturing place for me to go. So when I was sick, and Queenie, who herself became Catholic when she was in university, they took a trip to Rome, and she I was confirmed there in Rome in her early 20s. She was my sponsor, and I only met her less than 10 years ago. She came to our front door searching for Jordan because she was working with a politician who was trying to uphold traditional family values in the education system in Ontario, which at that time was the beginning of it sliding away. And now it's completely slid away. But she and her friend came to the door hoping that Jordan would help them in some public manner to support their cause. And after the political campaign was over, now and then I'd find a bottle of or a can of maple syrup or something on my doorstep. She would just So I didn't know her very well, but she would leave signs that she had been there. Just just very kind signs that she had been there. And I don't even know if we had gone for a walk. After I knew her, we went for walks quite often, but I was in the hospital, right? And she emailed me and just asked if she could come. And it didn't seem that unusual because she had periodically showed up in our lives, just more kind of staying at a distance, not knocking on our door, but just showing that she'd been there. And so it wasn't out of the blue that she sent me this email. So I think that was good planning on her part to make sure that she kept in contact with us. And for some reason, she felt that that was important. So when she did ask if she could come and visit me in the hospital, it seemed fine. So I said, sure. And she brought me a portrait of Mother Mary and baby Jesus in the Asian form. So this was an Asian Mother Mary because Queenie's Asian. And she brought two rosaries that had been blessed by the Pope. And she said, would you like to pray the rosary? I said, yes, I'd like to. I don't know how. And she said she was quite surprised that I said yes, because I guess she wasn't asking very many people. So she didn't know. Or she'd asked other people and they'd said no. I don't know why she was surprised, but she was surprised. And I didn't know how. And I can't remember why I knew about the rosary. I came from a small town. I lived very close to the Catholic school, the Catholic church. I walked by it all the time, but I had nothing to do with it, really.
Hmm.
And most of my friends were from the Protestant school. They put it on the other side of town. So I think we used to play volleyball against the Catholic girls, but we didn't have a lot to do with each other. They kept us pretty separate. So I didn't really have a lot to do with even the children that would have been Catholic. And I don't know anybody who carried a rosary either of the children. Now, I did have a very good girlfriend when I was young who took piano lessons from some nuns who were teaching piano lessons. And I may have gone there once when she was having her piano lesson. That's possible. I don't remember going, but I may have. I knew where they lived. And so that was probably my only Catholic community knowledge was the nuns. So I can't say why I knew about it, but I wanted to know about it, and it seemed right because I'd had this very profound experience when I told my son I only had 10 months to live, and realized that the doctor really what the doctor wasn't necessarily right, that he which I'd never really been somebody who was really devoted to my doctor's opinions. But for some reason, when they give you a cancer diagnosis, that seemed like something that he could do and that I should believe, right? And when I got home, I realized, oh, there was actually no reason for me to believe that any more than anything else I might have believed from a doctor. Of course, he may have had his reasons. There might be research that shows that outcome. But in terms of him having knowledge when I was going to die, I realized just how insane that is, that there's no way he would have any knowledge. No one has that knowledge. The only one who has that knowledge is God, the Father. And that at that moment and I've had moments like that since, moments that all of a sudden are more true than anything you've ever felt was true. It just was, oh, this is so true that I feel a deep understanding and a deep, I guess, surrender to this fact that the only one who knows is God, who only one who knows my destiny and who knows my son's destiny. And I said, all that we can do, is to accept any help that comes our way with gratitude and see what God has in His plan for us, because it's not up to me. And I realized that it wasn't up to me, and I'd always thought that my life was pretty much up to me. I mean, little kids, if they get in a situation where maybe they don't have as much guidance as they might have, one of the things they might decide to do is to take that upon themselves just thinking, okay, well, then I guess it's up to me. And so that was really the situation I was in, that I was always told when I was a teenager to be smart and to come home alive. And that was my guidance. And so it really felt like it was up to me to, and it was in a way to make sure I sat beside the driver and didn't let him go off the road if he'd been drinking, or like it was up to me to be responsible. But I took that further. I took that further, not just to take responsibility for my actions, but I started thinking that I could take responsibility for which way my life was also going to be going, and the things that I would pursue would be under my guidance. And it was at that moment I realized that was all misguided. That was all much, much too much for any one person to think they could be influential on, and it was only up to God. And so really it did start from when I was young, but really culminated at that moment with my son. And then when Queenie showed up, by then I had had my surgery already. But then the cancer was gone. But then um, I had a leak in my lymph system. They had taken all the lymph out from the left side of my abdomen, but there was a leak, and they couldn't find the leak. There must have been one lymph node that they hadn't tied off, but they couldn't find it. And I was in that hospital for 5 weeks, and I was down in the scanning room getting different kinds of scans every day. Like really, I remember. I went for an MRI yesterday, and I haven't been for any scans for a very long time. I just went for an MRI, a general MRI, just to see how I'm doing, and it reminded me of all those scans. And it was very cold in the basement, and I had gone from 130 pounds down to 90 pounds, so I weighed nothing, and I was just freezing. My family had bought me all kinds of wool, a wool hat, wool sweatpants. I had my son's hockey socks on, and I had a wool wrap that I wore around me, and I slept with a hot water bottle to keep me warm. So I was very cold, and I used to have to go down into the bottom of the hospital, and it was just one icy room after the next. So in terms of discomfort, it was really the cold. I was so cold that was excruciating for me. I was already under enough tension, I think, that just something as being cold. I remember when I was in my 20s, I worked as a volunteer in a palliative care. I volunteered on Saturdays, and there was a man there with brain cancer. And people with brain cancer, they're just healthy human beings, right? They just have something wrong in their
Yeah.
brain. So when you look at them sitting in bed, they look like they could just get up and leave because it doesn't look like there's anything wrong. But the poor guy, his feet were cold. His feet were cold, and he could not stand it, you know. And I was a massage therapist. So I massaged his feet, and I put some wool socks on his feet. And then the rest of the day, when I walked by, he'd say, "There's the woman that warmed my feet." You know, he was so relieved. He was so relieved. And I thought, that's how I felt when I was in the hospital. I was so cold that uh, just being warm enough. Sometimes I'd take my duvet and I'd be on the scanner with this big duvet trying to stay warm. Um, yeah, it was quite the time. So then, you know, she showed up right in the middle of all of that, Queenie. She showed up in the middle of all that and said, "Do you want to pray the rosary?" Of course. I mean, what was I going to say? Of course I said yes. There was lots of discomfort, and I'd already really surrendered that one day with my son. But I had no guidance from there because I was not a practicing uh, Christian, really. And so I needed some guidance. I needed to learn. And that was a good, I thought that's a good place to start learning right there. It's something that I could do every day. It's the same, basically the same story. It's the gospel story. Every day I can uh, learn to pray for other people. So it's also it's service. So I can practice serving others in my prayer. And it was the perfect beginner step to being for taking that Christian morality into my daily life, because you have to take it into your daily life. I mean, it's good to go to church on Sunday, and that's something to do, but to do it every day. And I pray every morning in the morning. That way I can monitor how I'm feeling that day. If I'm upset about something, if I'm nervous about something, I can take that to prayer. I can give that to God. And then when I start my day, whatever I run into that day, I can be present for and hopefully respond. So the rosary was super helpful, and Queenie came every day for 5 weeks. So at the end of that, I knew it. She taught me to pray it with her, and I knew I knew it. I knew how it went. I knew the intentions, but then I could discover for myself after I went that. And so she just left. She said she didn't come to teach me the rosary. She came to give me that rosary that day and to leave that little picture. But then she taught me like the joyful rosary, and she thought, well, tomorrow there's a different mystery. I guess I better come back. So then she came back the next day, and then it was like, oh, well, there's still another one. I guess I better come back for that. So once she'd come back 4 times and taught me the mysteries, it had been 4 days in a row. It had been the same time, and she said she was surprised at how serious I was about it, that I was truly going through my life and trying to bring to mind the people I loved, and all I was grateful for, and I was going through, and I think she felt that it wasn't something, maybe it wasn't time to turn away from that, so she just continued to come, and it continued to be that profound for 5 weeks.
Gosh, wow. It's, I mean, there's so much in there to ask about and to speak about. And I'm wondering too, even your approach to just taking this and the openness and the gravity that you placed on trying this and giving it a real go. I mean, you obviously weren't involved in Catholicism early on in your life, but I mean, dealing with palliative care and the meteoric rise of publicity that your family experienced, which you seem to deal with such grace. I mean, was there faith involved in upbringing that gave you this base with which to be able to have these experiences and be open to them and take them seriously?
Well, both my grandmothers were members of the church, of the Protestant church. One grandmother sang in the choir, the other one played the organ in her church. And there wasn't any prayer before dinner. There were prayers before I went to bed when I was a little kid. So there was that. And my grandfather died when I was 5. And I was sent to the playground instead of to the funeral. And that stood out as a red flag for me.
Hmm.
I thought shouldn't I be at the funeral? There was a question. I didn't know why I wasn't at the funeral. They were just, trying to be kind to me. But I was somebody who was already looking in that direction, and then that made me even look more specifically in that direction. Oh, my grandfather's died, and I'm not there. Firstly, what could be the reason for that I'm not there? So what's going on in my family that I'm not there? And also, what is everyone else feeling that is there? And so I was just curious about the whole, that just raised an interesting topic of thought for me, very, very, very young. And so I think that had, and his wife, my grandmother, she was always pretty philosophical, and so her philosophy and her Christianity were woven together pretty tightly. And so when I would go to stay with her, there would always be something. We'd go to church, and she would go up in the choir, and she'd go find a nice family to sit with, and then she would. And so she gave me little guy, and I'd go to the nursing home, and she would, because my mom would come visit, and my grandmother was a matron in a nursing home, So she would drop me off, and Grandma would say, "It's lunchtime. Go sit with the guests." So whenever we went there, we sat for lunch with the other guests that were having lunch. If they were having church service, we sat in the church service. If they were, whatever they were doing, we were part of. And I think that was also very good because none of it, my sister's a palliative care nurse, right? I was a massage therapist, and I used to give $20 massages to people in a assisted living home for a while. And so we weren't afraid of elderly people. And that was a very love your neighbor type of scenario. And so that's
Of course.
very right. So that's a value. That's a virtue that my grandmother taught me. So in a way I was taught these virtues, but not in a straightforward manner. That this is a virtue, and this is part of what you do um, when you go to church, and that it's all about being maintaining your love for God, but also your love for your fellow man. That was never described to me, but we lived that way. We lived that way. My mom never went to church at all, but she sent me there with my sisters. She thought that I should go. But once they left town, I stopped going. They were quite a bit older than me, and we lived 400 miles from the nearest city. So when they left home, they went to university, they were gone. And so when I was 12, I was home with my mom and dad, and I didn't go to church anymore. There was nobody to go with. And I was also a teenager, and I thought I knew everything because teenagers think they knew everything. And then I started learning that I had excuses, Oh, maybe I didn't like that preacher. So I'm not going to that church. Or maybe I didn't like somebody in the congregation. Well, I'm not going to that church. Or, it could be anything. Maybe I didn't like the time of day that the service was on. Maybe I didn't like the smell in the church. I mean, who knows what it was, but I could have a reason not to go. And since then I've learned, and finally I've learned that the it isn't about the priest. It's not about the parishioners. It's not about the church itself, and it's not about the church's public appearance even. It's about whether I go there on my knees in front of the tabernacle. That's all that's important. And I didn't know that. Now I know that. And so there aren't any excuses. There aren't any excuses. But I used to be I just thought there were excuses. And so I used them, not knowing that there aren't any. Oh, well, if there aren't any excuses, well, then I guess I better go. And so now there's no excuses. So there's no excuses for me not to pray in the morning. There's no excuses for that. There's no excuses for me to not join the church. Is this the right church? Is Catholicism the right religion? Well, I don't know. I mean, how would I know that? It just seemed like there weren't any roadblocks in my way, so that's the way I went. And through time, we'll see how it goes. But I'm not going to make that mistake again, thinking that I know what the answers are. I don't know the answers. So
Hmm. That's
that's
really profound.
mm,
Yeah, there's also something in your uh, conversion story, if you will, that I find really interesting is the role of Mary, but also the role of Queenie. And there's a lot of talk in many traditional Christian organizations around the world of the suitable and appropriate role of women in these churches. There are some women who feel a struggle to play a role, and I find that your story in particular is quite inspiring. But I guess, what kind of advice from your own experience would you give to women who do struggle to find their place in these traditional religious spaces and are looking at the offices, and the positions of authority? um, yeah.
well. We were at the Saturday vigil, and it was dark in the church. Everyone had candles, and for some reason, you could really see the stained glass. Uh, you could because once they turned the lights on, then I couldn't see the stained glass because it was dark outside. But for some reason, I could really see the stained glass when the lights were off. There must have just been enough street light, right, that you could see. And and right in the middle of the stained glass that's at the very front of the church is Mother Mary and baby Jesus. And then below the stained glass, the crucifixion was there. And we were looking at that, and we were talking about Mary's role in in religion and in the church. And Mary's role is there not by herself, but with her baby. So the iconic iconic image of woman is woman with baby in the church. And it's a sacrificial picture, as is the crucifixion, because when that woman is holding that baby Jesus, she knows that he's going to be given to he's going to be taken from her and from the world, and then returned to the world, but not under her care. And so it's an act of courage and strength to have that baby and offer that baby to the world. And so we were talking about the role of really the role of the divine feminine, I guess, in not just in church, but in religion, and and in our lives, whether we know it's there or not, it's there, right? So it's this deep feminine spirit. What is this deep feminine spirit? So we were talking about Mother Mary and the necessity of woman as mother, like Queenie, is taking care of those who are in need of being taken care of. So taking care of those who are in need of taking care of, but also sacrificing them to the world because they will be subject to whatever is their um, destiny in the world, and that's not for a mother to get in the way of that, because that's their own relationship with uh, the divine, right? That's a person's that's their own individual relationship with divine. So a woman can be the nurturer at the beginning, be the nurturer to bring that baby to a place where the baby is old enough and responsible enough that they can start to run up against the world. And then it's up to the mother to let go and see where this person is going to go, and not be afraid for them, because they do have a proper relationship themselves with their destiny and their lives. And the more that mothers get in the way of that, the more it twists that. And you don't want to twist that. You want it to be a true, clear relationship. And so that, I don't know if that's clear, but that's, I think, women's role is to be there and be awake and be nurturing to those who need it, and then to step away from those who don't and say,
It's such a
get out there, good job, get out there.
it's such a deep, rich, profound role that sadly sometimes seems to be devalued by
Mm,
society. You know, I've been thinking about this a lot too with the current role of marriage and the traditional roles within a marriage. And we've just had a bill here come into law. I think it came into effect today, where the state were essentially it's very hard in the UK to be able to live on a one household income um, family. You know, you need two incomes really now to sustain the kind of lifestyles that people encourage. And so they brought in a bill that was encouraging free childcare. You get sort of free 15 days of childcare a month here, and as of today, I think.
mm.
And for many, that's good. But I was just also reflecting on what that means for those traditional roles, and are we really devaluing in society the powerful role that women can play? I'm always very hesitant to talk about that role because I am a man, and some people would call me out. But having you here, I just think you've got some really profound insights on that.
Well, I'll tell you another thing that we've been thinking of that's very controversial and that I haven't thought about a lot yet, but is worth, I think, some time thinking about. I have to read more about it than I know. I don't know a lot about it. The Whore of Babylon, the Whore of
Mm.
Babylon, as opposite to the Virgin Mary. And if the Virgin Mary is an ideal in the church, and but you fall short, and everybody falls short. Everybody falls short of the ideal. That's why it's an ideal. So everyone falls short of that ideal. But that's what you strive to emulate, is this image of the Mother Mary and everything that she represents. But as soon as you fall away from that image and you decide that it's not the ideal anymore, so you've decided it's not the ideal, then you've decided something else is ideal. And what is ideal if the Virgin Mary is not ideal? So then you look in the Bible to find out what else might take that position. And God help us if it does. And God help those people who make that decision. Because you're making a decision one way or another. So if you're not choosing Mother Mary, then what are you choosing? And who are you choosing as your guide? And if it's hedonism, if it's sex, but sex not for uh, procreation, but for pleasure. So if it's just hedonistic pleasure, if that's what you've decided is your goal, rather than this deep, responsible relationship that you must have if you're a mother, because you have to get up in the middle of the night and you have to nourish the baby, and you have to take care of the baby when the baby's sick, and you have to protect the baby no matter what. And so there's a lot of responsibility there. If you decide that you're not going to do that, or if it hasn't happened in your life, so then you have to decide, what are you going to choose? Now, Queenie, she has no children, but she works for Hawthorne School, which is a Catholic school that goes from K to 12, and it's all girls. So now she's there, but she's been at Kintor College, which is it's like a family dorm, a Catholic family dorm where people, mostly international students, come and stay. And they all have dinner together every day, and they have speakers come in the evenings, and someone always is in charge of answering the front door, or, or making sure that birthdays cards are made for those people on their birthdays and stuff. So there's just kind of normal family type dynamics there to help these girls. If they're far away from their families, then they feel more at home, and they make friends, so that they have friends that they can turn to when they're homesick and stuff. So that it's a very good. So that's where she's been. So that's where she lives, even though now she works at this school with these kids who she says all they are is emotion, wild emotion every day, compared to the university kids who are starting to use reason and to be uh, thinking about the future and who they're going to be and stuff. In high school, it's just like one emotion after the next. She said it's really something to be around that. But she's found her mother role, right? She's found her mother role, and whenever she comes to talk to us, she's always talking about, there's this one child, and her mother isn't happy with the school, and she's not happy with the teachers, and we need to do something about. Do you have any idea of what we could talk to her about? So she's always asking me for guiding principles that she could use with these relationships that she's involved with. So she's always involved in maternal relationships, and so she's found
What?
her. So she looks like she's quite
Yeah,
joyous.
that's it's so insightful. I haven't thought of it in that way at all. I think that point of, if you're not looking to marry, who are you looking to? I think there's so much to that, and yeah, I wonder, because I know this isn't just for women. I know we're in a society where men are having their crisis as well. But for
Mhm.
me, I know a lot of people that were similar to my situation in their young Christian couples getting married quite young, as would have been the norm a decade or a couple decades ago, but for now is kind of not really aligned with how the world is. But I'd love to hear your advice for those young Christian couples with marriage and getting into marriage, early marriage in this world that isn't aligned with that, but also going on with having children as well.
Hmm.
I know that's a very big question.
It's a very big question, but but it's an eternal question, and it's a question I asked obviously when I was young. When I was going to get married, I asked my older brother how it had been for him. He was married when he was probably about 25 and had kids pretty quickly after that. And I can remember they had two children. And I can remember when their kids were a little bit older, they were having a conversation with me, and they kind of a playful manner said, you know, it would be advantageous if we got a divorce and just lived independently from each other. The tax system would work better for us if we weren't married.
Wow.
And the same thing when Jordan and I were married, and we were going to, I would have liked to work. I would have liked to work, but, and I did work some, but I didn't make that my major contribution, partly because if I was going to go to work and put my kids in daycare, it was going to cost me everything I was going to make every month, pretty much. So it was financially not really worthwhile to put my kids in daycare. So it seemed more worthwhile for me to do something meaningful and be no further ahead financially, but not really that much further behind either, because it was going to cost that much for daycare anyway. So I wasn't going to really bring home any money, but I wasn't going to be with my kids very much. And so for me and Jordan, it seemed the right decision for me to stay home. And so we didn't have any magazine subscriptions. We didn't, it was before cell phones. We didn't call home. We lived a long ways from home, but you didn't call home. You sent letters. You didn't go out to dinner, and you didn't go out to movies. You stayed home. And we didn't live around any family. And even though I was 31 when I had my first daughter, we didn't know that many people, especially when he was in his postgraduate work, that had any kids. We were the only ones who had kids. And we were already more than 30 years old. And, you know, now there's statistics that say that if a woman is 30, she has a 50% chance of not having any kids, because first of all she has to find someone to marry, so she's got to find, and that takes a couple of years anyway. It doesn't happen like right away, so that means you're going to be 32 by the time you're married and ready to start having children. So that's part of what goes on, and the other part of it is you might not find someone to marry, so then that's a mess. So 50% of women are not going to have kids who are over 30. And it's not just because fertility starts to go down, it's because it's complicated to find a partner. And I think it was close to 90% of that 50% of women who aren't going to have any kids will regret it. So these aren't people who are voluntarily not having babies. These are people who have waited too long. And really, that is the message of today. Because now we have IVF. Oh, you can freeze your eggs. And actually, if I talk to young women, they're asked to freeze their eggs when they're quite young. And that's not a sure thing either. And it's also questionable. So the best and healthiest choice in terms of having a baby and a family is to get married and have children right away and not wait, because there is no good time to have a kid. There's no good time. uh, I can remember my sister, she was older than me, and she was a nurse, and she was very devoted to her career, but she was married and she did want to have kids, but she'd say in 5 years, 5 years I'm gonna, and then the next year she'd say in 5 years, and then the next year, you know, the same thing, and then it was, oh, I'm pregnant. So there wasn't any time where it went 5 4 3 2 1. She was putting it off until she couldn't put it off anymore. And so you have to, it would be a good thing to reflect on. Am I putting this off? Am I putting this decision off? And if I'm putting this decision off, why am I putting this decision off? Is it because I want to improve on my career? Want to or have to? That's a good question. Because if I want to, there's lots of time to improve your career later. And people say to me, oh, but if you haven't worked up the ladder before you go home with your kids, it'll be impossible once you're older. Well, it'll be a different ladder. There's no doubt about it. It'll be a different ladder. So you're not going to have the same opportunities you had in your early 20s as you are going to have in your 30s, if that's when you go back to work. But if you think about it, going back to work in your 30s, even if it's your mid 30s, 45, 55, 65, you're going to have 30 years of work. 30 years of work once you've had your kids and your kids are in school again. And women live 7 years longer than men. So they that's almost what the time it takes to stay home with your kids at the beginning, and they live longer than men by that amount of time. So they already kind of have it good that they're going to live a little longer. And so, yes, you get taken out of the workforce for the time it takes to have a baby and to stay home with your baby so that your baby can attach. Because it turns out, and I didn't know very much about this, but attachment theory, it isn't just that the baby is attached to their mom and dad. It's that as they learn their emotions, they look at you to see if they are showing the right emotions. But they can only do that with somebody whose body language they understand and they know. So they're with their mother, and their mother does something, and they flip out, and then they look at her to see if this is an appropriate way of responding to whatever happened. And if your caregiver is changing all the time, then you're trying out these experiments, and you have no idea then what you should and shouldn't be doing. And so they call that an attachment problem that the kid ends up with. So they respond inappropriately to emotional cues because they never had the chance to really solidify their relationship with their emotions at home, or with their mom or their grandmother, or somebody who was definitely there all the time. And so that's another reason to either stay home or live really close to your parents or your husband's parents, so that you have someone else who can do, or your aunt, or an aunt and uncle, or someone who's devoted, someone who actually has skin in the game, who is devoted to this child. And church congregations would play that part, right? If you go to church, then the people within the church, that's your community. Um, and that community, when there's a crisis in the family, then the church community comes to that family to try to, support them through crisis. But when you have a little baby too, in a way, it's a crisis moment, because it's a real change of time, change of life experience, probably one of the biggest change of life experience. And if you have people from the church who will take the time, and they will, I mean, I just went to a dynamic Catholic women's conference, and there were 500 mothers there in this one room, 500 mothers. And I thought, that's where all my sisters are. Here they are in this room. And when you're not part of a church, where are you going to feel that kind of um, camaraderie? But you can feel it there. You can get it there in that community, and we all need community. People move so much now; they've decided communities are voluntary, but they're not voluntary. Little kids need community, women need community, and men need community. And I believe that women need community with other women, and men need community with other men, and children need other children to play with. So, and we all think, oh no, it's all interchangeable now. No, it's not. It's not. It's not. I mean, Queenie, right? She was a stand-in sister for me, a bigger sister in some ways, because she'd been in the faith longer than me and knew more about that. So even though she's younger than me, so I can be her her older sister, but she can also be my older sister because she's more aware of scripture, and she can point me in the right direction when I need to learn something about the faith. So I don't know. Did that answer anything?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I owe so much to being raised. I was raised my whole life, weekly going to church, having activities during the week, and as a child and teenager, and even now, that is so important. I'm so grateful that my parents took the effort to do that. And, we often say it's not about you don't remember a single time you prayed as a family before going to school and such, but you do remember that it happened consistently. And I
Mhm.
think, yeah, that was so important in my upbringing, that valuable community that I still am so close to now, and mentors there, and just but as you say, kind of extra mothers and fathers, extra aunts and uncles, extra cousins, extra brothers and sisters, just so valuable. I wanted to go back to your experience with the illness that you had, the severe illness where you were given 10 months to live, and I don't want to say discover, but you were taught the how to pray. And I wondered, were you seeing the effects of that prayer in real time in your hardship, or was it more viewing it in retrospect? And I think this is really important for
A little of
people.
both, probably a little of both, I would imagine, because there it was a very intense time, and I was also dealing with pain and uncertainty, and so all of those things made it difficult for me to reflect uh, as much as I can now. I can reflect a lot more now that I'm not in distress like I was, but that distress made the contemplation and the prayer indispensable. So without it, I don't think that I would have, I had a very long, I started doing yoga when I left the church. So when I was 13, my aunt introduced me, gave me a book. Uh, I went to visit her for a week. We tore down the pig barn in the afternoons. In the morning, we did yoga. And then when I left, she gave me a book. And I took it home, and I was the only kid at home, right? I was the only kid at home. And I was an athlete. And so yoga was like, I'm going to do some exercise. So that seems to fit with who I am. And this meditation, I thought, well, I don't know what this is. And I don't think it's all that helpful to me now, but I think it'll probably be helpful later. That's just my one, I think it was my intuition, and my conscience was telling me, yeah, you should probably, you haven't stuck with anything else, so you should probably just stick with this. It'll be constant, it'll be every day, because you're pretty, you can put yourself on a schedule. So I was somebody who could put myself on a schedule. So I was going to bed. I wouldn't let myself go to bed without doing a bit of yoga at night. And so that was good for me, because sometimes I'd go out with my friends when I was in high school, and I'd have some beer with them, because in Alberta everybody drank beer, which I didn't like. But anyway, would have some beer, and I couldn't do yoga as well. I couldn't concentrate as well. I couldn't balance as well, and so it was a very good self reflection to me that I had to be mindful of what I did in my daily life, because it impacted how I could practice this Eastern mysticism, really. And I think that it didn't bring me to Christianity. So I think that it kept me from my faith, but it also prepared me for my faith. So it was a mixed bag of good and maybe a little bit of trouble. So I meditated and did yoga from the time I was 13 till I was 55. I meditated every day. And so then when I started to pray, it took the it took that same, it was the same intention that I had taken to meditation, I took to prayer. And so I just slotted prayer in and let the yoga go. And so then I was praying every day instead. I was praying every day instead. At about in the morning, because I after years of doing it at night, I switched to the morning because it was better to do in the morning. Prepare yourself for the day. And so I started praying, and that would have been after that moment with my son, I began to pray, but I can't remember, because mostly what I was praying was the Lord's Prayer. Until I learned the Rosary, I was praying the Lord's Prayer, and I continue to pray the Lord's Prayer. It it was it was something that I had learned as a child, was the Lord's Prayer, and so it's always stayed with me. And that practice began really with Queenie. It really began with Queenie. I didn't really have when I first got into the hospital after they realized I had a, a leak in my system, I was nearly going to have a heart attack because I had lost so much fluid that my electrolytes had gone out of balance. And I didn't know this, but when your electrolytes go out of balance, that means that I don't know, but the respiration of a cell, there's potassium going out, and there's uh, chloride, anyway, going in. And so you have these ions that are bringing oxygen and taking CO2 out, and they're bringing nutrition in and out of the cell and all of that. If any of those go out of whack, um, seriously out of whack, you have a heart attack, because your heart works on those as well, right? So it's all a function of the uh, in and out of these electrolytes, and they're moving. mm, they're attracted here and attracted there, and if that attraction gets out of whack and they're not attracted anymore, then the beating of the heart isn't as rhythmic as it needs to be. And if that's not going to happen, then you're not getting the blood to the lungs, which needs to happen so that there's an exchange of oxygen. So there's oxygen to your cells. I mean, there's all this stuff that is coordinated with this pump of the heart. And so they noticed that my electrolytes were out of kilter, and they said, go to emergency. And so they put me on a heart monitor, and then they put nutrition straight into my heart. And I think it was about 3 days later, I woke up and I thought, oh, here I am. All those people look very sick. I guess I must be really sick too. But I had been so kind of out of it that I was still walking around and stuff, but I wasn't really conscious, because I had lost too many electrolytes and my body was barely hanging on. But you don't really know that if it happens. It happened over weeks and weeks. I was just getting weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. And because I had this leak, and it, like, the fluid filled up my feet, then it filled up my lower legs, and it filled up my thighs. But this was, when I phoned the hospital, I'm like, I have some swelling in my legs. They said, well, you had very radical surgery. We took your kidney and all the lymph on that side of your abdomen. It was very radical surgery. You're going to have swelling. I'm like, yeah. seems seems kind of. And I went to the doctor's office, and he looked at me and he said, oh, you got to go to emergency, like, obviously. And they siphoned off 9 liters of fluid that had accumulated in my system, that wasn't being circulated around my body.
9 liters.
9 liters. They'd never seen so much. They were saying, we're going to do a scientific experiment on you. I'm like, okay, whatever you want, but as long as you keep me alive, keep me alive. But I
Where,
really.
where for you was where for you was God in this? I know many people who would go through your situation would probably tend to resentment and bitterness and why me, but you're going through this and you've learned to pray. And I guess what was that hinge point that made you think, yeah, this is real. I've got to keep praying every day, and I found God in this.
Well, I think it was really seeing my son. I
Right.
told my son I was going to die, and the look on his face, the look in his eyes, he was so sad. He was so sad, and uh, he was losing his mother, and I hadn't seen his love and how deep it was ever before. Because, well, I'd never told him I was leaving before, so I can imagine people see that when they tell their loved ones that they're leaving. They see that. But I had never been in a situation where I had shared anything with my son that was me telling him that I was leaving. And when I shared that with him and saw how hurt he was, I realized he loved me deeply, more deeply than I loved myself, and that I had been living a life of doubt and some cynicism. I was living a life of self-will, and I could just all of a sudden see that very clearly. I felt, well, no, it's not true. I felt something lift off my shoulders, like a weight of the world lifted off my shoulders, and I felt filled with God's love. And it took me really months to put that into words. I read something one day about doubt and um, the confusion that you would feel if you were not feeling kept up by, in the hands of God. So cynicism and doubt were my constant companions. From the time when I was 17 or so, I tried to run a swimming pool. I was running a swimming pool, and they had little grade ones come into the swimming pool. When they jumped in, they were too short. They were too short, so they went right under the water. And when people can't swim, they just look from under the water at you. They don't move because they don't know what to do to get to the top of the water. So they don't actually do anything. But they can see you. So they just look at you. And then I would, so then I had lifeguards. I would say, there's one, get that one out, get that one out. So after that day, I said to the school, if you're going to come again, and I know you're going to come again, I want you to bring a parent to be in the water with the kids for every 10 children, because there's 30 kids in the class and there's 3 classes. So that was a lot of kids. We had sectioned the pool off into 3 quadrants of 30 kids. But I said, it won't work otherwise, because I can't miss one child. I have to take care of all the children. And when they showed up at the pool the next time, they didn't bring anybody to go in the water. And I said, you can't come in. Sorry, I'm not going to do that again. And so I got called over to the town council, and of course my dad was a businessman in this little town. The mayor was the plumber. I knew the mayor. Some guys on the city council were farmers that we had gone to buy milk from when I was a kid. Like, I knew his wife. We used to go and uh, chop off the heads of the chickens and pluck them and take them home for dinner and buy eggs. Like, I knew these people in our day-to-day life. We curled with them at the curling rink. I knew them, and they sat in a meeting with me, and I said, so you want me to just let these kids in? I said, fine, write a letter, tell me exactly how you want me to run the school program, and sign it, and I'll run it the way you want me to run it. They said, well, you'll let one kid drown. I thought, well, yeah, that's my point, is this is not a tenable situation. But I was 17, and I was pretty shocked by them saying that I would let a kid drown, and I quit. I quit being but I was, um, I was hurt, because these had been my father's friends, and these had been people who were business people of the town. And I realized that what I thought was government is corrupt. Government is corrupt, and you can't trust those people in power. And so I didn't even vote for quite a number of years after that. I became quite cynical. Um, and these are little towns, so I knew everybody right to the top of the hierarchy. But I assumed if I was in Montreal or Ottawa or any big, or New York City, that the mayor of New York City, he was no different than the mayor of my little town. Like, these were just people. And so I felt the same way about the people in world politics as I did about the people in this little town politics. And I was, so I carried that cynicism with me for a very long time. And it was only up until that point. And, and I felt like at that point I had to take care of myself. I felt like I was kind of put out to, I was put out of the fold of my community. I wasn't protected by my community. I lost my job. And then uh, there was a small community college. They gave me a job to work in the garden, which was perfectly fine and a lot less stressful. And so I had a good rest of the summer, but that bit of cynicism stayed with me. It stayed with me, and it stayed with me until that moment when I realized that I had been taking on too much responsibility for my life, that I was not trusting in God to take care of me and help me make decisions, that it was up to me. I always thought it was up to me, and that I was, without making those decisions, things weren't going to go as well as they could. So I didn't realize that if I would pause and wait and watch, I could see a better way because God would show me. I didn't know that. And that, and I've learned that since. And so life's like way better now. I wouldn't say it's easier, because as soon as you decide you're going to follow in God's path, He gives you all kinds of challenges to do that are way more than the challenges I had before. And that's fine because, well, that's the way life goes. But um, I had spent a lot of time thinking that I was the driver of the bus, and I ended up with cancer and nearly dying. So it didn't work very well. For a long time it worked, but in the end it didn't work at all.
It's so interesting listening to you talk that, and the word that comes to my mind is deliverance, which is something for me, when I read the scriptures, that is what shines out to me so much throughout. That is, for me, one of the key principles. And um, Chris Williamson from Modern Wisdom will often say the cynicism safety blanket, and I think that puts it really well. Is it is this safety blanket, but through prayer and through succumbing to God, and as you've spoken of, the adventure that comes from that, there is this deliverance that whatever is holding you back. I was a Christian missionary for 2 years in Asia, and someone had who was a Buddhist had just been hit in this tragic accident on his motorbike and had flown, and he had had a stroke in the hospital after having recovered from it. And we were asked by a family member to teach him how to pray. And after teaching him how to pray, one night he was struggling with pain, and he decided, well, I'll pray just like the missionary showed me. And he had this beautiful experience where sort of Christ was revealed to him
Mm,
for the first time in his life.
mm,
And I remember asking him what he felt like afterwards. And in broken English, he had said something like, "Well, I've decided that I'm going to propose to my girlfriend and get a haircut and go to church." And it's just, for everyone, there are these different manifestations of what deliverance truly looks like to them. And we see that throughout scripture, whether it's Daniel from the lions, or Psalms 31 or 32, where they're surrounded with songs of deliverance. And I think that's for me one of the most beautiful messages of your conversion as well, is deliverance physically from illness, but also deliverance from all of these different personal things that you have as well.
yes, that we all have, that we all have, because we all have these ideas of who we are. We have these ideas of who we are, and we don't know who we are. If you step back, if you pause, and if you take the right step, you're going to go on an adventure and find out who you are, and it isn't who you thought you were. It's something more than that, but you don't even know what it is until you make that, because you can't see it until you let it happen. And you don't just let it happen, because when it happens, you have to have courage and strength and move with it. You have to move into that challenge. And so it's a very subtle distinction of between being like hands off and not not forcing things, waiting for things to happen, but then taking the necessary steps. And that's very interesting, the way that it's a dance in a way, isn't it? Because when you're dancing with someone, you don't force your dance partner. You wait to see where they want to go, but then you go with them. You go with them so that it's fun. And life is like that too. You can't force it. You have to wait for it to show you the way, but then you go along with it. And, the best dancers they lead in a subtle manner. And I don't know how to lead because I'm not a man, I'm a woman. So I do the following when I'm dancing. But a man also has to be very aware of the woman, where she is on the dance floor, to know which way to go. So there's also this play, I can think of waiting, of knowing, and of taking a step and then having her take the step at the same time. So, but life is like that every day, as we are presented with the next person, the next challenge. The trick is to be present enough to see what's going on and not impose ourselves on it so much that we can't see what the next right thing is to do. And you have to be somewhat courageous, right? Because you have to have faith. You have to have that's faith. That's faith, to have the courage um, to put yourself in that vulnerable position of waiting and to respond by what is there rather than imposing your will. That seems like a certainty, and it seems like it's the best thing to do, but um, it's way more challenging and way more interesting to wait and see what it might be.
That's beautiful, and I'm so grateful for your time today. I thought an appropriate concluding question would be, obviously, your husband's touring with his new book, and you've been asked on many of those shows to open and to actually speak with the audience and share stories. And I heard on a separate interview that you meditate for the day and think about, and you're not bringing notes up on stage, but you're thinking, what should I share? And I thought to ask, what are the common themes that you're feeling inspired or impressed to share to people, and what are you hearing from meeting with so many people on that very busy tour that uh, hopefully I'll be able to go to when you're in the UK?
Oh, that would be good. So I haven't been sharing that many stories recently, but it's also been very good. So before I go on stage, there's a musician that plays. He's a British musician, David Cotter. He's doing his
Yeah,
PhD in
yeah.
classical guitar, and he was brave. He came along with us and has learned along the way of how what to present to everyone. So he plays for about 20 minutes, and he focuses everyone's attention so that when I get out on stage, everybody's pretty focused and they're pretty ready, and that's beautiful to see. And I knew that people were going to join us on tour. Konstantin Kizin is going to join us right away, and he's a Russian satirist comedian, and he is going to join us. I didn't know exactly what he'd do, but that would take up time. So I have to make sure I have to be careful with the time, because we only have a certain amount of time that you have to fit into this little show. So previous to this book, at the last book, I would tell a story for about 15 minutes. But this time, what I do is I go out there, and first of all, I say hello to everyone, and I thank them for coming, and I thank them for taking the time out of their day to come and sit and listen to my husband, because he has something to say. I don't know what it'll be, but he has something to say, and he um, is very grateful that they're there to listen. And then I usually thank the musician, and we clap for the musician because that's always good. But then I thank the people who put together the evening in the arena, and sometimes they're big arenas. And so there's all these people that are working behind the scenes to make that work. And then, of course, there's our security guys who get us there, and the tour manager who works between the arena people and us and makes everything work. And he's very good. He's been working with us for a long time, and he never, if he has a problem, he fixes it. He's great. And so I introduce all of those people, And then if I'm inspired, I'll say something like um, that it's a good place to be. I like the city, and that I like to see what people are doing in the city, and that it looks like it's coming along. So um, that people are taking responsibility for their city, and it presents well, and that's really nice for somebody who comes to visit, because then they can see why people live there. And then I can talk maybe a little bit about all of the married couples that I see, and that I get to travel with my husband, and that we've learned on tour that we need our own space. We used to travel and take the same hotel room, but then we realized that we were not on a tour, we were living on the road, and that you don't live in one room when you live on the road. So we each get our own hotel room, and then in separating myself from that room and getting my own room, I started doing the things that I had been putting off, because I have a podcast of my own, and I wasn't doing my podcast because some he was also doing a podcast from his hotel room. And so I would just sit at the side while he did his podcast, and I wasn't even booking mine. I had decided to start a podcast, and then I wasn't doing it at all. And I was getting more and more frustrated about being on tour. And I went home and I asked God, I said, I really liked being on tour, but it's not working. But I'd really like to go on tour. Is there anything? What could I do to make it go better? And I heard this voice just tell me to get my own hotel room. And I thought, first thing I thought, ooh, that would make my husband angry, if I got my own hotel room. But then I thought, would it make him angry? Actually, no, I don't think it would make him angry. I don't know why I thought it'd make him angry. And then I called a friend and I said, I asked God if I should get my own hotel room, and what I heard from my conscience was do this. And she said, yeah, do it, get your own. So I said, okay. So I called our assistant and I said, book my own rooms from now on. And I went back on tour, and the first night there was no show, and he said, so you're going to stay with me? And I said, no, I'm not, actually. I have my own hotel room. I'm going to stay in my own hotel room. And he said, and at first he was like, what? I didn't really, well, he trusted me, so he let me go. But what's been really interesting is, if you sleep in the same room and you sleep in the same bed, then when you go to bed at night, there's expectations that you are going to spend some time together, or you're at least going to, I don't know, read books for the same amount of time and then shut off the lights at the same amount of time. Like, there's these expectations that come with sharing this bed, right? But when you're not sharing the bed, then at dinner or something, he can say, um, are you going to be up when I come back? And I can say, no, I'm kind of tired tonight. I think I'll just be asleep. Oh, what about tomorrow? Do you think you could be awake? Or tomorrow we don't have a show. Tomorrow we don't have a show. Do you think we could, spend some time together tomorrow? And yeah, okay, I'll plan on that. I'll make sure I have a nap and everything, and I'll be ready. And so then it's a negotiation. It's not an expectation, it's a negotiation, and it has to be spoken about, because I have a door I can just close. So it isn't something that you can kind of muddle through. You can't just muddle through and kind of make insinuations by what you want but not really say, because there's nobody there to even see you going through those vague signs that you want something, because there's nobody there. So it's been very good for us to be straightforwardly truthful to one another of what we want, what we need, and then to be grateful for it when it happens. And so it's all about gratitude and truthfulness again. And so I might give a little talk, something like that, that's not very long. And then I say, let's not, keep you any longer. Put your hands together. Let's invite Jordan Peterson on stage. And by then, um, they're ready. They're definitely ready. And so when he comes on stage, everybody stands up and invites him on stage, and it's beautiful.
That's amazing. Well, Tammy, I'm so grateful that you would spend some time with me today. I've learned so much from you. You're so insightful. You're someone that I greatly look up to and admire and respect. And And just so glad that you're doing well as well. It was so lovely to see all of the videos surrounding your confirmation, and you looked so happy, and it looked truly joyful. So congratulations on that, and thank you very much.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you. We got the time organized so that I could do this. I'm sorry I missed it at the beginning, but I'm changing time zones and I have no idea where I am. So I'm
No,
glad we caught up with one another. Yeah, really nice.
thank you. That interview was so enjoyable for me. It was a real privilege to speak to Tammy, and I hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, then again, like and comment your thoughts, subscribe to the channel for more, and share it. All of these buzzwords. And of course, if you liked that video, if you press here, that one you will love. So go and do it, please. Thank you.